Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, spent his entire career exploring the depths of human consciousness and the mysterious process of psychological transformation. Through his work, he discovered that those who feel most alienated from the collective are often the very individuals undergoing the most significant inner development. Jung called this process individuation, and he believed it was the central task of human existence. When you feel different from everyone around you, your first instinct might be to pathologize yourself. Our culture certainly encourages this response. We're taught from early childhood that fitting in is paramount, that belonging to the group ensures survival, and that deviation from the norm signals danger. This isn't entirely wrong from an evolutionary perspective. Our ancestors needed tribal cohesion to survive in a hostile world. But Jung recognized something that collective thinking often misses. Not everyone is meant to walk the same path. Some individuals are called to a different kind of journey, one that requires them to venture away from the well-worn trails of conventional thinking and feeling. These are the people who sense there's something more beneath the surface of everyday existence, who feel an inexplicable pull toward deeper meaning, who cannot simply accept the ready-made explanations that satisfy most people. This calling doesn't feel comfortable. In fact, it often feels like a curse. You might experience profound loneliness, watching others form easy connections while you struggle to find anyone who truly understands you. You might feel exhausted by small talk, drained by social situations that energize others, confused by interests and concerns that don't seem to resonate with your peers. You might even wonder if you're depressed, anxious, or somehow psychologically damaged. But Jung would tell you something radically different. The universe is preparing you for something extraordinary. Your differentness isn't a bug in your psychological programming. It's a feature. It's the signal that you're being called to individuate, to become fully yourself in a way that transcends the collective programming most people never question. Jung's concept of individuation describes the process by which a person becomes psychologically whole and truly individual. It's not about becoming different for the sake of being different, nor is it about rejecting society altogether. Instead, it's about integrating all the disparate parts of yourself, the conscious and unconscious, the acceptable and rejected, the light and shadow, into a unified whole that is authentically you. This process is inherently isolating because it requires you to question everything you've been taught about who you should be. The collective consciousness, what Jung called the collective unconscious, contains the shared beliefs, values, symbols, and patterns that bind societies together. Most people live their entire lives within these parameters, adopting the roles and identities their culture provides without much reflection. But the individuating person cannot do this. Something within them rebels against the prescribed path. They feel compelled to explore the forbidden territories of their own psyche, to examine beliefs they're supposed to take for granted, to feel emotions they're supposed to suppress, to pursue interests they're supposed to ignore. This is why you feel different. You're not moving with the herd because you're being called to discover your own unique path. The universe, in its mysterious wisdom, has selected you for this difficult but profoundly rewarding journey. One of Jung's most important contributions to psychology was his concept of the shadow. Those parts of ourselves that we reject, deny, or repress because they don't fit with our conscious self-image or society's expectations. Everyone has a shadow, but most people spend their lives projecting it outward, seeing in others the qualities they cannot acknowledge in themselves. When you're called to individuation, you cannot avoid the shadow. In fact, confronting and integrating your shadow becomes essential work. This is often why feeling different becomes so uncomfortable and even frightening. As you separate from the collective, you lose the psychological defenses that group membership provides. You can no longer hide behind shared beliefs and cultural narratives. You must face yourself directly, including the parts you've spent your whole life avoiding. This shadow work is grueling. It requires you to acknowledge your capacity for selfishness when you've always prided yourself on generosity. It demands you face your hidden anger when you've built an identity around being peaceful. It insists you examine your secret desires when you've presented yourself as someone above such things. It asks you to own your potential for cruelty, manipulation, cowardice, and all the other qualities you've judged as unacceptable. No wonder you feel different from everyone else. You're doing psychological work that most people will never attempt. You're descending into your own underworld, facing your inner demons, and attempting to integrate what you find there rather than continue projecting it onto the world. The universe is preparing you through this difficult process because wholeness, true psychological integration, requires embracing all of who you are, not just the parts that fit comfortably into social expectations. Jung observed that there exists a fundamental tension between the individual and the collective. Society needs individuals to conform to certain standards in order to function. Without shared norms, values, and behaviors, social cohesion would be impossible. But the individual psyche has its own imperative to become whole, to actualize its unique potential, to express its singular essence. Most of the time, most people manage this tension by sacrificing their individuality to collective demands. They adopt the persona, the social mask, that their culture, family, and peer group expect them to wear. They learn what opinions are acceptable, what emotions are appropriate, what ambitions are reasonable, and what behaviors are required. In exchange, they receive belonging, approval, and a clear sense of identity. But for some people, this bargain becomes impossible to maintain. The cost of conformity becomes too high. The persona feels suffocating. The prescribed identity feels false. These individuals begin to feel profoundly alienated, as if they're living someone else's life, as if they're trapped in a role they never auditioned for. If this describes your experience, Jung would say you're hearing the call to individuation. The discomfort you feel around conventional people and situations isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that your psyche is refusing to settle for a borrowed life. The universe is using this discomfort as a catalyst, pushing you toward the difficult but essential work of discovering who you actually are beneath all the layers of conditioning. This doesn't mean you're destined for loneliness forever, but it does mean that your path to genuine connection with others must first pass through a period of separation and self-discovery. You cannot truly meet another person until you've met yourself. One of Jung's most fascinating and controversial ideas was synchronicity, the concept that meaningful coincidences occur in our lives that cannot be explained by conventional causality. Jung believed these synchronicities were evidence of a deeper pattern underlying reality, a connection between the inner world of the psyche and the outer world of events. When you're undergoing individuation, you often notice an increase in synchronistic experiences. The book you randomly pick up contains exactly the message you needed to hear. You encounter a stranger who shares a crucial insight at the perfect moment. You dream about something that then happens in waking life. Symbols and patterns seem to appear everywhere, as if reality itself is trying to communicate with you. Skeptics dismiss these experiences as confirmation bias or coincidence, but Jung took them seriously. He saw synchronicity as evidence that the individuating person is aligning with something larger than themselves, what he sometimes called the self with a capital S, the organizing principle of the psyche that transcends the ego. When you feel different from everyone around you, pay attention to the synchronicities in your life. They are the universe's way of confirming that you're on the right path, even when that path feels lonely and uncertain. These meaningful coincidences are breadcrumbs leading you toward your authentic self, signals that despite your isolation, you are not alone. You are being guided by something that operates according to a logic deeper than the conventional cause and effect thinking of the collective mind. Jung discovered that certain patterns and symbols appear across all human cultures and throughout history. He called these universal patterns archetypes, and he found them not only in myths, religions, and fairy tales, but also in the dreams and fantasies of his patients. These archetypes represent fundamental human experiences and the psychological patterns through which we make sense of life's challenges. One of the most important archetypes is that of the hero's journey, the pattern in which an individual is called away from ordinary life, faces trials and tribulations, confronts death or the threat of annihilation, and ultimately returns transformed with gifts to share with their community. When you feel different from everyone around you, you are living your own hero's journey. The call to adventure came when you first realized you couldn't continue living an inauthentic life. The separation from the ordinary world is your increasing alienation from conventional people and pursuits. The trials are your shadow work, your confrontations with your fears and limitations, your willingness to face uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world. The universe is preparing you by initiating you into this archetypal pattern. You are not merely having a difficult time or struggling with psychological problems. You are undergoing a transformation that humans have recognized as sacred for thousands of years. The shamans underwent it. The mystics underwent it. The artists, philosophers, and visionaries who changed human consciousness underwent it. Your differentness is evidence that you've accepted the call, whether consciously or unconsciously. Now you must trust the process, even when it feels overwhelming. The hero always faces a dark night of the soul, a moment when all seems lost. But this is when transformation actually happens, when the old self dies and a new self is born. There's a reason Jung called the unconscious deep. The conventional world operates primarily on the surface of things, concerned with status, appearances, immediate gratifications, and socially approved goals. When you cannot find satisfaction in this surface existence, you are forced to dive deeper. This is not comfortable, but it gives you access to dimensions of life that remain forever closed to those who never question the shallow values of the collective. You gain depth of insight. You begin to see through the social games people play, the defenses they employ, the ways they deceive themselves. This isn't about judgment. It's about perception. You develop a kind of X-ray vision for psychological truth. You gain depth of feeling. While others skate across the surface of their emotional lives, you plunge into the depths. Yes, this means experiencing more pain and darkness, but it also means accessing profound beauty, wonder, and connection that superficial living cannot provide. You gain depth of meaning. The questions that preoccupy you, questions about purpose, truth, authenticity, existence, are the questions that matter most. While others distract themselves with trivialities, you're grappling with what it means to be human. This is exhausting but also profoundly important work. The universe is preparing you to be a person of depth in a world that desperately needs depth. Your willingness to feel different, to endure the loneliness of the individual path, is developing capacities within you that the world will eventually need. Jung emphasized that individuation is not complete until the person brings their gifts back to the collective. The hero's journey ends not in permanent isolation, but in return. The hero comes back to their community bearing treasures, wisdom, and abilities that serve others. When you feel different from everyone, it's easy to conclude that you're simply meant to be a solitary outsider forever. But Jung would challenge this interpretation. Your difference, your depth, your hard-won self-knowledge, these are not meant for you alone. They are gifts that the world needs, even if the world doesn't yet know it needs them. The challenge is learning to translate your inner experience into forms that others can understand and benefit from. This might be through creative work, through teaching, through healing professions, through leadership, or simply through the quality of presence you bring to your relationships. The person who has done their inner work radiates something that affects everyone they encounter, even if they never speak explicitly about their journey. The universe is preparing you not just for your own sake, but for the sake of what you will eventually contribute. Your suffering has purpose. Your alienation is forging you into someone who can see what others miss, feel what others avoid, and know what others fear to explore. If you feel different from everyone around you, Jung would remind you of this essential truth. You are not lost, broken, or behind. You are exactly where you need to be. The universe operates according to principles that transcend conventional logic, and your life is unfolding according to a pattern that serves your deepest growth. This doesn't mean you won't feel pain, doubt, or despair. The individuating person often passes through what St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, a period when all meaning seems to vanish, when even the journey itself feels pointless. But Jung understood that this darkness is not the end. It is the chrysalis, the necessary death that precedes rebirth. Your task is to trust even when you cannot see where you're going, to continue the inner work even when it feels overwhelming, to honor your differentness rather than pathologize it, to remember that the greatest human beings who ever lived, the artists, mystics, healers, and visionaries who transformed human consciousness, all felt profoundly different from everyone around them. The universe is preparing you for something extraordinary. Your willingness to feel different, to endure the loneliness, to do the inner work is not in vain. You are becoming fully yourself, and in doing so, you are participating in the most important work any human being can do. So, when you feel alienated at that party, when you can't relate to what excites your peers, when you wonder if you'll ever find your people, remember Jung's insight. You're not failing at being normal. You're succeeding at being yourself. And that is precisely what the universe intended all along.